Greetings, and welcome to OLR Connections from the Ohio Lodge of Research. In this episode, our master, Brother Chad Kopenski, concludes his conversation with worshipful Brother Jason Richards of the Masonic Round Table Podcast. While we typically try to keep the episodes to about 30 minutes, you will find that this edition runs significantly longer. While the conversation was very meaningful, it did not allow itself to be truncated, nor was there a good stopping point to allow for a break in the episode. But we think you will value the extra time to hear the origin story of worshipful Brother Jason Richards.
Is that why you joined? Like what made, how did you get here?
Oh man, I don't know if we have time for that.
I don't think I know your origin story. Like how did this all happen? How did you come in?
So, my parents are originally from Zanesville, Ohio. So I spent a lot of time up in Zanesville as a kid with my extended family. And one of the things that was tossed around casually was, hey, your granddad was a Mason. Hey, so my grandfather and great uncle on my mom's side were both brothers. My great grandfather on my dad's side was a Mason. My great grandmother was Eastern Star.
Oh, wow.
My great great grandfather was the first generation of Masons in the United States from my dad's side of the family, because my great grandfather ended up joining the Oddfellows, but we won't talk about that.
He's the black sheep.
So Sunbury, Ohio, is where my great grandfather got his degrees in the 1940s, and my great uncle did the same thing up in Sunbury, Ohio. Family moved down to Zanesville and got involved in a little, or big at that point in time, lodge known as Lafayette Lodge Number 79. Met in the Zanesville Masonic Temple.
Shout out to Merkel and Shoemate and all those guys.
So, we'll talk about Merkel and Shoemate.
I love those guys. Yep.
They're amazing. So I grew up hearing about Freemasonry. My grandmother on my dad's side and my aunt on my dad's side were Eastern Star. My aunt is past Grand Worthy Matron of the Ohio Order of the Amaranth. Okay. And so Masonry's been kind of in the family, but there was no one who would tell me more about it because my grandparents and great-grandparents passed before, I really had reached kind of that age where I could be like, hey, like, what is this stuff? And so, my grandmother would always refer to Eastern Star as, oh, we've got that cult thing. And so I'm like, okay, whatever. And so it wasn't until decades later, I ended up getting out of grad school, went to work, and met a Master Mason named David Hill.
Okay.
And David Hill was the first person I ever met who was open about being a Freemason and was more than willing to share what it was with me. And so through this mentorship with David, I started to really get interested in Freemasonry because of the family connection. And I was like, you know what? My parents are they're kind of black sheep of the family because they're the ones that moved away down in Virginia. And so, this was a way for me to start to rekindle that family connection and just keep that tradition alive because it really kind of dropped off at my parents' generation. And so
was it time or just it was one of those things that just wasn't of value to them necessarily, or that they had other priorities.
So my parents especially had other priorities. And so I think my parents really focused on Christianity and a certain brand of Christianity, and that was their life, and still is to a large part. So that was their priority. Um, they weren't big joiners either, and so it was family and God and faith. And so I started researching Masonry, at the time. This is 2009, 2010, 2011. There wasn't a lot on Masonry online. And the things that had been written and published about Masonry, especially from a Christian perspective, as I was raised Christian, were universal in that they were not positive. So you had, the Southern Baptist Conference or Convention that denounced Freemasonry. I grew up Presbyterian Church of America, which had written, a statement about Freemasonry that was basically like, we can't find anything wrong with it, but we don't like it. And
I grew up Catholic, same thing, like that papal bull of, yeah. So sorry.
Yeah. And so I went to David and I'm like, look, can you just introduce me to someone who's a Mason and a Christian so I can talk to them and figure out what this is all about? And he took me upstairs and he introduced me to a young man who was expecting his first child. And that young man is Jonathan Thomas Ruark.
I don't know the origin story. That's interesting.
And so John and I realized we both went to the same church. We were both drummers. We were both interested in Freemasonry. Like, we were essentially, we were kind of the same person.
Was he a member at this point, or okay?
Yes. He was a member of Herndon Lodge. That's his mother lodge. And he was in the process of starting up a new lodge called the Patriot Lodge at George Mason University. And so he and I hit it off really well, had great discussions, and I ended up, petitioning my mother lodge, Acacia Lodge. And so what I got into Freemasonry for is not why I stay and what I get out of it as value now.
I always kind of question anybody who, like, the reason they joined is also the reason that they stayed. Because why you come in, but why you stay changes for me on a daily, yearly basis, so that's.
I came to Masonry for the fellowship. I wanted to get in touch with my family roots, and I wanted a good group of men who I could rely on and be brothers again, just like my fraternity brothers who stood up with me at my wedding.
Awesome.
I was not at all interested in spirituality, mysticism, or esoterics, because I had a foundational crippling fear of the occult and esoterics.
Really?
Based on my evangelical upbringing. And so, there were lots of, part of the satanic panic, lots of thoughts about demon worship and things like that. And I remember very concretely, and I'm being very vulnerable and very open here. I remember concretely talking to my father about joining the lodge, and I was like, hey, like, there's a prayer that's said in lodge, and there are people in lodge who aren't Christians. If I'm praying with someone who is a non-Christian, am I blaspheming God? And these were things that, like, represented a very immature understanding of spirituality. And
but if guys can only pass on what they've been given, it's absolutely justified.
Yeah.
It's how you think the world works. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I think my father said, his worry would be that Masonry and hearing about people from other faith structures would turn me away from God. And so there was this idea that, hey, you're on the straight and narrow, don't let people turn you off to the side. And for that and a number of different reasons, starting in about 2013, I went through a serious deconstruction of my Christian faith. I tore it down. And Masonry and the brothers that I met from different faith systems helped me have the courage to do that. And it was a 10-year process where I have reconstructed my personal faith, and I understand what being a Christian in my context means for me, and I am at peace with that.
Was that a frightening journey? I mean, I guess I would think that would be very frightening and at times very almost lonely or isolating.
Terrifying,
yeah.
when you have a worldview that there are the elect and the folks who follow the straight and narrow, and it's just a few, and everybody else is going to be tormented for all eternity in unthinkable, unspeakable ways, like that has an impact detrimentally on the psyche. And so it was terrifying. But my brothers, specifically around the Masonic Round Table and other scholars in Masonry, helped me kind of take that chance. And so this is all a roundabout way of saying I eat, sleep, and breathe the mystical side of Freemasonry now. And that's what keeps me here. And it is not at all what I thought would happen when I started. But I see my openness to men of all faith structures and my willingness to engage in discussion and learn about God from men who have a different focal lens that they're looking at God through. That is Masonry's value manifested in my life.
Yeah, I totally see that. That was beautiful, by the way.
I didn't plan it, so
no,
dumb luck. I'm just happy to be here. And I'm sorry, this is supposed to be a Masonic show, and I'm getting into a lot of sectarian Christian philosophy.
We're okay.
Yeah. As I 100% believe in the ecumenical nature of Freemasonry, in that there is truth and goodness and light in all faith structures. So that being said, my own personal experience is through the lens of one might call evangelical Christianity. And so I had always grown up with this idea that, like, I needed to be grateful to God. Like, God saved me from eternal torment, and like I was supposed to just be in love with God, and it never quite clicked for me.
Yeah.
Because I felt like it was a bit of an abusive relationship. It's like, well, why do I need saving? Oh, because original sin. But there's a total depravity of man. 5 points of Calvinism, baby. Man's unable to choose God. So God has to work in man. So God is the architect of our destruction, and we have to come back to God. Like, it did not, like, logically make sense. And the cognitive dissonance, like, I put it out of my mind for the first 20 or so years of my life. And when I got to Masonry, I, for the first time, was able to explore that cognitive dissonance with other like-minded members of faith.
Right.
And I was able to also see people of other faith structures who were incredible, amazing, insightful, compassionate, wonderful people. And it got to the point where it's like, I don't believe that they are going to be made to suffer torment because God deems it so.
Right.
And so the first chunk that I took out of my faith was biblical inerrancy. And so grew up, every single jot and tittle in the Hebrew Bible is directly inspired by God. I'm like, okay. So for 2 years, I just immersed myself in historical criticism of the
Okay.
Bible. A lot of Bart Ehrman, a lot of Richard
Oh
Rohr,
gosh.
and just like, okay, what do we know? Because I did my bachelor's in history. And so I know about historical writing, historical research, and primary and secondary sources. And I'm like, okay, what can we as historians tell about the writings and manuscripts that eventually became canonized as the Bible? And what I ended up finding, again, for myself, is the Old Testament is a very messy collage of
Yes.
internally inconsistent and competing oral traditions. And so I do a presentation on worldwide flood mythology, and I talk in there about how there are actually two separate flood stories that the author of the manuscript that ended up being Genesis kind of just smushed together.
Right.
And Robert Alter is a historian and a just an expert in the Hebrew Bible. He does a great commentary on the Hebrew Bible, and he himself says, yes, these are two different oral traditions. The author tried to make them fit, but you can't reconcile one with the other. And so I was at, a point where kind of I grew up, basically saying, hey, if you find one thing wrong in the Bible, you have to throw the entire thing out.
Been there. Yep.
Because if it's not perfect, it's all bad. And so over the course of 4 or 5 years, I had to chip away at biblical inerrancy and embracing the allegory and the meanings of the Bible. And through that, I started to open myself up to mysticism and thinking about the Bible from an allegorical context. Like what was the intent behind this? And how do I interpret that intent, and how do I use it to manifest good in others?
I would think that would make that text come alive for you then,
It did.
because
It
it make it
does.
so much more personal. Yeah.
It does. And the other the other part that I struggled with, and this was like the back half of my deconstruction, which was a really dark time. We had a global pandemic happen during the back half
Yeah.
of deconstruction. The other half was letting go of my gripping, paralyzing fear of hell. And I, again, went through it as a historian, and I said, okay, what can I know about the afterlife? Like, well, can't
Near-death
read
experiences.
about
Yeah.
it from people who died and then all of a sudden were alive to write again. Or can you? What about people who died and came back? And so I undertook this probably 2-year-long research project into near-death experiences. And this culminated in an hour-long contemplative exercise I do on death as your final initiation. And I give that in person to lodges and to help brethren release their fear of death and what comes after. And what I found throughout the research I've been doing, going all the way back to the 1970s when this really took off as a medical field, was at the end of the day, like, there are really only a couple things that the entities you meet on the threshold care about. And the biggest thing that people get asked is, what have you done for others?
My father's no longer with us. Uh, my father's one of his favorite books was a book called Life After Death. Small little blue book. I'm trying to remember the author, and he made me read that when I was like 5. Um, which, but my father always maintained that when you get to heaven or wherever is after this,
Mhm.
that whatever higher power is out there, they're going to ask you 2 questions. How well did you develop the gifts I gave you? And how well did you use them in the service of others? And you saying that, now I kind of want to go find that damn blue book that my dad had, because now I'm wondering how much of that, I mean, seriously, my dad said that every single, I mean, that was his, I wonder how much of that came from that blue book.
So we have, again, one NDE is an anecdote. It's a single data point. We
Right.
have tens of millions of medically documented near-death experiences. And so from that, you can draw quantitative empirical conclusions. And so based on that, that's the crux of the question that people get asked when they're on the threshold of death and dying. And you can ascribe that to an overdose of DMT,
Right.
or your soul kind of loosening itself from the body. Like, however you want to describe that is fine. I don't think it makes it any less impactful. And so when I kind of said, hey, all the data point to loving and service of others as the key linchpin and mechanism. Well, what does that mean for Christianity? And I went to Matthew, and what is the greatest commandment? It's that you love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul,
Right.
all your strength. And the second is like it. You love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I can operate within the bounds of that. And for me, my faith structure is, how do I grow my relationship with God? And how do I love everyone as I love myself? And that as you love yourself is important, because you have to be able to love yourself in order to reflect that love onto others. And that was something else I had to learn. And so that grew into my focus on contemplative living and
Right.
Christian mysticism today. And so that is the shift that took place for me to really engage in esoterics and love the mystical allegorical aspects of Freemasonry. And that's what keeps me here.
I had the title of the book wrong, was Life After Life by Moody. So, which I'm sure is on your bookshelf because, yeah, 1975. That was it.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, that is Life After Life, by the way, is the linchpin that got the medical community thinking about near-death experiences.
yeah.
It's the OG. Yeah.
My dad was in neurodiagnostics, and so he did a lot of tests on brain activity. So I'm sure, 1975 when that came out, I was 3. So it makes perfect sense that he was. One of the things about Masonry is that it is a lens to figure out the way the world works and our place in it. What is interesting to me about your journey is that it was coming to that. You came to Freemasonry and you found the quote unquote safe space that you could inhabit and go on that journey. Um, and there were brethren there who were on probably a similar journey, just at different spots, or they came in at different times or right times or wrong times. And
It's
so
a continuum across that broad level of time.
I don't know. In my mind, Masonry revealed the world to me and revealed how wonderful in the pure sense of that word, the world is, it almost sounds like it did something very similar to you.
Oh, it absolutely did.
Did it? Go
Masonry
ahead. I'm
gave
sorry.
me courage.
Ooh, interesting.
Masonry gave me the courage to ask hard questions and seek out the answers, not that I thought my parents or my church would want me to arrive at, but the answers that actually resonated in here to me. And I don't know if I would have ever had the courage to do that had I not had the support of my Masonic brothers.
Yeah. How could you? I mean, that's a journey that's not individually sustainable.
Right.
I mean, if the foundation of you is rocked that hard, you you're just going to crumble. But to have the brethren around you to prop you up, pick you up, sit with you and keep you safe, like that. I didn't know that journey about you. Uh, yeah, that's amazing to me.
I usually reserve that for very, very close personal friends. And I count
Thank
you
you.
among one of those
Oh,
very close personal friends.
and you. Uh, that being said, would you rather this not go out to the rest of the world? Because
No, that's
we
fine.
can. Okay.
No, that's fine.
Um,
So I think I think for me, like if this can be a service to others to give them comfort and help them, explore what, being a better man or, you know, uh, you know, being more confident in your faith structure or spirituality, like if this gives them encouragement and confidence to do that, then I will have served my purpose.
the faith that you had before, where there were elect that were going to heaven, and there were so many that weren't, that isn't an inherent disconnection with the people around you. Inherently, you are disconnected, and inherently, you are placing value. You're saying, you're going to hell. I have a shot, but you go with the goats.
It is a deeply divisive tribalist
Oh yeah.
framework to work into, and it's one that we see played out very, very prominently in white Christian nationalism today. We don't need to get into more on that necessarily, but we have grand lodges that say that the volume of sacred law has to be a King James version of the Bible. And I think a lot of the a lot of the brethren who proclaim that Freemasonry is Christian, I think it comes from an inherent belief that not just Christianity, but their version of Christianity is superior to all other faith systems. And I think that's a deeply dangerous thing to introduce into the craft.
I agree with that.
And makes it a whole lot harder for me to love everyone as I love myself, which is why, I try not to get political, but it comes out on TMR, and I recognize that. But I focus so hard on trying to love and genuinely be good to everyone that when I see stuff like that, it evokes a visceral reaction.
Even in Christianity, they weren't supposed to be sex. They were supposed to be like, all of us have to figure out our relationship
You're
to
the
God.
rock. On
Yeah.
this rock, I'll build my church,
Right.
not all my various churches and denominations and subsections. Right.
Much like
Yeah.
all of us have to kind of figure out what Masonry is and express it in our own lives, all of us have to figure out our own relationship to that, whatever that higher power is, and what that means for our own life. And when somebody comes around and says, hey, this is the only way you can do this, that it's limiting. It's
There is a ton of power in the individual nature of building a relationship with the creator. And focusing on it being an individual journey makes it very difficult for someone to exercise power over you. And so when you look at things like white Christian nationalism and evangelical Christianity, it is a mechanism to enforce standards in a power structure over others through guilt and fear, because you become the gatekeeper to eternal torment or eternal bliss. And so if I can hold eternal torment or eternal bliss and wrestle that away from the individual, and if I can be the arbiter for that, it gives me immense power over this individual or this group of people.
right. And it also gives you sense of entitlement, sense of self-esteem, and that power of making.
It gives me a title.
Yeah.
I can be the right worshipful, right? Like,
Hey,
it
I
feels
have that
good.
title. So
Well,
yeah, I know.
it was an example,
Right.
but
I know. I'm kidding. I'm just,
yeah,
but it also gives you, you talked about it like an abusive relationship, right? The other person is chasing your approval. The other
yes.
and you can move those milestones wherever you need to move them and keep them chasing that approval.
Those goalposts, they be shifting. Yeah. And if you take that power on the individual level and you start to exercise that power over a group of people, you now have groupthink, and you have an isolating function that notches up the tribalism to 11. The idea then becomes it's us, the elect, versus them.
But let me throw this out there.
Okay.
Isn't that kind of what Masonry already does, right? We take good men and make them better. We already put the line out there.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody can be a Mason. The argument that we are elitist, we already have our elect and our unelect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, aren't we? How are we different?
Again, there are pockets where it doesn't play out like this.
Right. Yeah.
How we're different is, instead of enforcing a doctrine and a structure and exerting power over our members, we tell them it is their journey.
As much as I love you, and you know this, I mean, I think what I am loving so much about and learning about this is understanding just how hard that is, and I'm thinking about you on that journey. And again, like how tough that is. And you get it. And you absolutely get it. And the fact that you survived is a whole other thing.
I'm
But
still on my journey
you,
too.
oh God, yeah, we're all on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite books, of course, is, Superman, A Man for All Seasons, a comic book by, Tim Sale. So if you walk in and you see a guy who wants to be obligated on a copy of Superman for All Seasons, you're good with that.
Yeah. And here's the deal, right? Like now it's nuanced, and
I know.
we can reduce all we want. Would I be good with someone who wanted to be obligated on Mein Kampf? No. Look, is it powerful, and does it demonstrate a tangible connection to the divine? If yes, then moving on to the second question. The second question is, does it hurt others?
Yeah.
And does it demean or belittle others? If no, then obligate away. I think a volume of sacred law has to have both of those conditions. Because, look, no other obligation that you take would be
binding upon you.
as binding, right?
But there will be
I
some.
can obligate myself on the King James version and like understand it's rife with historical inaccuracies and mistranslations and not take myself seriously on it. Right?
Is that there's going to be those who argue that, different volumes of sacred law do demean and hurt others, right?
I think it all comes down to an individualized experience for the brother. Chad, what is deeply powerful and moving and representative of your relationship with God is different than what is the same for me.
But we can both experience it side by side.
Right. And we can experience those things not at the expense of our brothers.
You came to this from a history background. And again, I keep admiring the bookshelf behind you because you can't see my bookshelf over there and, all the weird stuff that's on it.
So this was kind of the start of the bookcase. And so you'll see like Good's Encyclopedia and, Little Masonic Library and all those things.
I got those,
Now, those are more primary sources. The middle bookcase are the secondary sources. And so you've got like, The Morgan Affair, The Lost Empire by James Morgan, Haunted Chambers by Karen Kidd, just kind of thought pieces and secondary sources. And then this entire shelf here is mysticism and applied theology and Robert Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible. And so these bookcases represent my journey in Freemasonry. And I didn't do that on purpose. It's just kind of how it came out.
There had to have been points in your own journey of discovery that you wanted to just throw it away, right? Screw it. This is good enough. Or screw it. This is too hard. Screw it. This is... Or somebody, maybe there was an authority who said, no, don't go there. Don't look at this. How did you get around that? How did you mitigate that obstacle?
2 quick anecdotes from my deconstruction. The first time where I almost gave up was in 2020 when the pandemic hit, because I was still actively deconstructing, and I was in this place where I'm like wrestling with, hey, I'm finding these inconsistencies and errors in the Bible, and I'm wrestling against what I was taught, which is it must all be true or none of it has value. And the pandemic hit, and my own mortality and the mortality of those I love really took center stage. And I was petrified that I wouldn't figure it out and have an answer before I died. And as a result, I would suffer eternal torment. And, so I went to a pastor on a recommendation. I was like, hey, I've been reading a lot of Bart Ehrman, and this pastor laughed at me. He took a very condescending tone. And it was a disappointing interaction overall. And that's the main part of this that I remember, is that this man of faith just did not take my journey seriously. Because, up until this point, I was like, well, I don't know if Christianity is the way, but I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to be a Christian, just so, like, I'm good in case it turns out to be okay. And the logical gymnastics I did
Oh
throughout
yeah. Oh, I've been. Yeah.
most of my teens and into my 20s. It was a thing. But, being faced with my own mortality, like, I was terrified that just by questioning the way, right, the way to salvation, that I would render myself ineligible to receive it.
Oh wow.
That was the first point where I almost gave up. And it was the cognitive dissonance that made me keep going, because I'd rather be wholeheartedly wrong than half-heartedly right. The second very challenging thing was when I opened up to my parents.
I had questions about that, but yeah.
When I had very real conversations with my mom and dad about where I was spiritually. I remember it. So my my great uncle, my dad's uncle, passed away several years ago, and David Merkel did something amazing for me. My dad and I drove up to Zanesville for the funeral. David gave me a big part in the Masonic funeral service,
Oh, Merkel's
so
the
that
best.
so that I could honor my departed family member, in front of my other family members who were in Amaranth and Eastern Star. And so I was the chaplain for my great uncle's Masonic funeral service, specifically because of David Merkel and Josh Shoemate. And so
two phenomenal individuals. I love. Yeah.
I owe them a great debt of gratitude. And I'm very grateful and thankful for their friendship. Driving back, I had a book with me. I think it was one of Bart Ehrman's. It might have been How God Became God.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It might have been one of Richard Smalley's. That's going to drive me crazy. So I'm just going to say it was either Richard Smalley, who's done a lot of like work with inner Christianity and kind of contemplative Christianity, or it was Bart Ehrman taking more of a historical criticism approach to the New Testament. And my dad saw the book. He's like, "Oh, hey, what's that about?"
12-hour drive, by the way, right? 12-hour drive.
6 to 7 from DC up to Zanesville. And so I basically said, screw it, let's rip off the Band-Aid. And I like, when you grow up hearing that tarot is demonology and will damn you to hell, opening up about Christian mysticism and the fact that I have way too many tarot decks that I use as an active part of my spiritual practice, is terrifying. And I just went with it and I said, look, I am comfortable for the first time in my life. I am content in who I am in relationship to the divine. I am asleep in the arms of the dragon for the first time in my life. And it's not the Christianity that you taught me. And that was really hard to say.
Oh yeah, I bet.
And, you know, I talk a lot about my evangelical upbringing, and none of that is to throw any sort of shade on either of my parents. They are genuinely good people. And my dad was very understanding. And he said this, like, I will never forget this. He said, Jason, I am just so thankful that we have the relationship where you feel comfortable engaging me in this conversation. My dad modeled what it's like to listen to and learn from someone who has a different viewpoint in that conversation.
It's beautiful.
And, you know, it's why I have a plan for a tattoo on this arm that just says love your neighbor. And I want to get it in my dad's handwriting. And I've told him this. I almost gave up in that car ride. But something in me was just like, I couldn't be true to myself and go back to what I was. Like, I was living a lie.
Right.
And I could no longer live that lie. And so a similar thing happened when I talked to my mom about it at a different time. I was like, hey, like, I know we talked a lot as a kid about demonology and things like that. I need you to know that, like, I'm very steeped into contemplative Christianity, and I use tarot as a daily part of my spiritual, self-awareness and practice. And like, throwing myself out there like that again was terrifying.
Oh yeah.
And her response, I think, mirrored my father's, in the sense that she was like, I want to have this relationship with you, and I want to be in relationship with you where we can learn from each other and we can talk about the hard things. And I never once felt any judgment from either of them in those conversations. I think in some ways they were like, well, at least he's still a Christian, right?
Right.
There is that. But it really opened me up to kind of that relationship that I can try to model with my son. And those were two times where I almost gave up.
I grew up in a part of Wisconsin where at a time when, we didn't talk about those men who didn't like girls, right? We had particular names for them, and like, they were weird. It was other. And of course I went into theater, but I remember that a good friend of mine during college discovered who he was, and came out of the closet, and he said that he was most petrified to come out to me. And I was like, huh? And he said, well, Chad, just so you know, like, we can tell you're straight like 2 blocks away. You know that, right? Like, well, thanks, I think.
And why am I so bad at it?
Yeah, why am I so bad at it? Yeah. But he said he was most afraid to come out to me. And I remember thinking, I was thinking how awful that was. Not about him, but about me. How am I the kind of person that this person who, he's a dear friend, I love him to this day, he is important, but who am I that they're afraid to share this piece with me? And it did send me into a serious reflection, how wonderful, I guess, is how wonderful that your dad recognized what you were doing, and how wonderful that he says, like, again, not a judgment, not a thing on himself, but just letting you know that he loved you and he appreciated you, and that you know, I'm here, how just again, later on as a teacher, I have had students who have come out to me and not their parents. And it is an honor when those students tell you those things and say, like, I trust you with that they see you as somebody safe or see you as somebody who they can have that relationship with.
So I
What?
have a heart for LGBT youth. And I've
Me too.
kind of made that clear on a number of occasions on the Masonic Round Table. And the reason why is because my entire period of questioning my faith, and when I figured out that just what I got brought up with just didn't jive, came because my little brother in my fraternity, Phi Mu Alpha Symphonia, miss you, Chad Simpson.
Miss you, Chad.
My little brother in my fraternity came out to me. And so I was in music. I did a lot with music in college. And as a result, like, I witnessed firsthand members of that community and the impact that certain sectarian dogmas, the very real impact that it had on them. And so when Brad came out to me after college, like, I met him in Bible study in our Christian student union, right? Like, when he came out to me, that was the forcing function, because I'm like, I can either stay with my current worldview on Christianity that is deeply harmful to this person, or I can say, that doesn't work for me anymore. I choose this person. And that was very hard to do.
Yeah,
But
it is.
I chose that person, and I would make that choice every time.
Yep.
And that is one of the reasons why, I have trigger buttons, right? Like, I have a heart for the LGBT community. I have a heart for women in places they are underrepresented.
Agreed.
And I have a heart for being genuinely good to everyone you meet.
Agreed.
I see others being hurtful and hateful and exercising power structures using identity politics. It drives a knife into the very core of my being.
I don't like bullies. I haven't since I've been bullied. I just don't like bullies, and I become irrational. Oh, it does not.
Probably for the best.
But what's interesting, again, we'll bring this back to Masonry, which is that, isn't that what we're supposed to do, right? Right. As Masons, we're supposed to be enlightened, and then we're supposed to be empowered, and we're supposed to stand up to bullies. We're supposed to say, no, I don't know how I want to say this, but I almost want to say, like, what's so beautiful about your story was that, right, you had a choice.
Mhm.
And by that choice, your world gained more colors. It became broader. It became
Like going from like 1080p to like a 4K television.
right. Like, yeah. And in Masonry, it seems to me like that's what we're supposed to do. Like, we learn about those things, and then we're supposed to go out in the world and say, hold on, no, the world is much more beautiful than you think it is.
So I'm drawing a very interesting correlation between what we've talked about with the interior journey of the Mason and Masonic research.
Okay.
Both require an individual to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Both are hard. They're scary. But if done the right way, both can lead to an increase in knowledge and understanding of all brethren involved.
And make your world more colorful. I think that's probably the best place for us to stop, because that's a great so yeah, you give me a lot to think about. And I really do appreciate, like, I don't know that I ever heard I knew bits about your story, but I didn't know all of it. And no, I have so much love and respect for you, because I can only imagine how hard that journey was. And
It's my mission to make that burden light for others.
as a man, I don't want anybody to make my life easy, but sometimes you just kind of want your life just a little bit easier, like that little, and just what a gift and what grace there is in that. And what you described just as saying it's beautiful doesn't even do it justice. So
I can't carry your burden for you, but I can carry you.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, paraphrased badly. Our
How
job
many?
isn't to do the growing for our brothers, but our job is to empower them to grow.
Yeah.